Welcome to Jackie's Craft Table. Hi, thanks for joining me today. I've created another card for my 2017 Christmas card series. It's actually two cards using two different mediums, but the same layout. The stamp set I'm using is from Power Poppy, and it's called Heaven and Nature Sing. For the first card, I'm going to emboss the image with some Simon Says Stamp ultra-fine antique gold embossing powder. I'm prepping my cardstock with some anti-static powder. This will help keep the embossing powder from sticking where I don't want it to. This is a very detailed stamp, so I'm liberally applying some Versamark ink onto this. And I'm using my Fiskars stamp press for this as well. I really like this stamp press because the foam pieces keep it up off of the cardstock until I can decide where I want to stamp it. I'm taking my time and really pressing down hard this stamp set onto the paper. I want to get a really good impression. And now for the fun part. I just love pouring the embossing powder over the image and seeing it catch on the card. I love this antique gold embossing powder. It's one of my favorites. And then I'm just flicking off the excess. The anti-static powder sure helps a lot. And then I can just funnel this back into my container, and this sure does last a long time. I allowed my heat tool to heat up for about a minute before I brought it to the paper. It helps cut down on the paper warping. I just love how this melts into bright gold. After my embossing powder has melted, I let it cool off for a few seconds, and I'm going to put it in my mini MISTI so that I can stamp out the sentiment. I could have stamped it all together with my Fiskars stamp press, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my sentiment at that time. But I decided to use some more Versamark ink and add more antique gold embossing powder to it. This would be a great card to mass produce because you could just leave the stamps in the MISTI and keep stamping it. You could create as many cards as you wanted to. This is such a gorgeous stamp set. I just love all of the details. The mistletoe, the berries, the flowers, and then the pretty birds. So after I finish up with the sentiment, I just take a tissue and rub off the excess anti-static powder, and it comes off very clean. I'm using a few Prismacolor pencils for this card. The coloring went really fast, and for this card I'm pressing down really hard so that the colors show up vibrant. I really love the look of colored pencils on dark cardstock. I'm going to turn on some music for a minute and let you watch the coloring. using a die to cut out a frame right on this card panel, and I'm taping it in place just so it doesn't shift when I run it through my Sizzix Big Shot. Now I have 3 pieces to my panel, and I'm just pulling out the third piece from this die. It tends to get stuck in there, but they have little holes that you can pop them out. On this edge piece of the panel, I'm using my Versamark marker to go around the edges, and I'm going to emboss that with some more antique gold embossing powder. This Versamark pen is a lot of fun to use. You can add a lot of little fun details to your card panels. I'm just going to emboss 2 edges at a time so that I have a place where I can hold onto it. It's such a thin piece of paper that I'm just laying it down on my piece of scrap paper and melting the embossing powder on that. If for some reason there's little gaps or chinks in the embossing powder, you can always do another layer. I'm going to let that cool off for just a few seconds. I'm just making sure it's ready for me to hold on to, and I'm going to add some more Versamark ink onto the other 2 sides. I have some very thin score tape that I'm going to add to the back of this frame. I'm creating the card base with some Nina Solar White 110-pound cardstock. This is going to be a top folding card. Now I can pull off the release paper, and I'm going to add this right onto the card base. I'm trying to put this on as straight as possible. It's kind of tricky because it is such a thin frame. Now for my second piece of the card panel, I'm going to be cutting out some more cardstock using this frame, and I'm going to use several of these frames and glue them together. This will create a little bit of dimension. I wanted to pop up this faux stitched card frame onto my card. I end up using 4 layers of the white cardstock to put underneath my red cardstock frame. I'm using some multimedia matte glue to adhere all of these frames together. I'm using even more of my multimedia matte glue to put on the back of this frame, and then I'm going to glue it right onto my card panel. I'm making sure to glue this on the right side up so that when I put my last card panel in the middle, it matches up with the heat embossing. I have to hold this down for a few seconds because it does want to pop up with all of the layers underneath. I'm using a thicker width of score tape to place on my last piece of my card. All I have left to do now is to pull off the release paper and adhere this last piece of the card panel onto my card base. I really love how this card turned out. I love all of the gold embossing, and the cranberry colored paper sure make it look festive for Christmas. Now on to my next card. I'm using the exact same layout as I mentioned before, but I decided to stamp this onto a piece of Canson XL watercolor paper and pull out my Zig markers. I haven't played with them for, it seems like, quite a while. The Canson XL watercolor paper is my paper of choice for these Zig markers. I want these flowers to remain white, so I'm just putting down a little bit of gray and blending that out with my water brush. And then that just makes them have a little bit of shading so that they do look truly white. Otherwise, if you didn't add shadows, it would look pretty flat. This card was even quicker than the first card because all I'm doing is stamping and coloring. I could see myself making many of these cards to send out for Christmas. I'm going to turn on some more music while I finish coloring in this card. To finish up, I'm just adding some pale green around the perimeter of this image, and it just makes the images pop a little bit more. And I decided to go ahead and heat emboss the sentiment again. I'm going to use a bright red heat embossing powder for this one. So it's the same process as the first. I'm just adding my Versamark ink onto the sentiment. I, of course, used my anti-static powder first, especially with the red, because the red you will really see if you get any stray embossing powder on your panel. And then I can pour over the embossing powder, flick off the excess, and melt the powder with my heat tool. I chose a piece of beautiful dark green cardstock for my card base. With this card base, however, I'm going to have to put a piece of white cardstock in the middle so that I can write my sentiment and it will show up. I pulled out my tape runner to add to the back of my card panel. I could have used more score tape, of course, but this was just handy and it was on my desk, so I'm using this to adhere my panel onto my card base. I was going to call it done here, but I thought it needed another frame, so I'm going to use my same frame die and cut out a piece of red cardstock. I thought that added just a little more zing to my card. And then for a very last final touch, I pull out my Wink of Stella pen, and I'm just going to go over the birds and the flowers and the berries, just to add a touch of festive glitter to the card. Between the images, I'm making sure to wipe off my glitter pen onto a piece of scrap paper so that it doesn't transfer the different colors where I don't want them to be. This pen will reactivate your zig colors, so you have to be careful of that.
Please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also click on the bell if you'd like to be notified when I publish a new video. And don't forget to share this video on your favorite social media.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope all of you are finding the time to create some Christmas cards of your own to send out. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in my next card video. Bye!